Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Michael Murphy. I'm a live learning instructor, and I'm pleased to have with me today Harold Wong from the Microsoft Corporation. Harold, how do you do?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Now, Harold, my understanding is that over at Microsoft, you are what they call an IT evangelist.
That is correct.
Now, can you do me a favor? Can you tell us a little bit about what an IT evangelist is, what you do, and I mean, obviously, you're not doing tent revivals.
No, I'm not. Although, no, I'm not doing that. So when you look at an IT evangelist and evangelism in the technology field, it's actually something that you see more and more of. But the whole idea of my team and my role is to go out and talk about our technology, making sure that people understand what the technology can and can't do. Right? So we have the ability to, be honest, be upfront, and be able to tell really what can't be done as well. Whereas if you look at somebody that's in sales, even if they're technical sales, they have a quota. And if they have to meet their quota so they get paid, they are going to be incented to really push a product and to make sure that people buy something. Whereas for me, I just get to talk about the technology. I get to have fun talking to community, talking to anybody who's willing to come to my tent revival, right? And listen about what is it that Exchange can do. When is the right time to deploy Exchange UM or not deploy Exchange UM, right? So I'm very upfront and I'm very honest and I'm technical in that respect.
So you have no sales quota.
No sales quota.
You're technical in your nature.
Exactly.
And so really a lot of what you do is educational.
It is. I mean, so if you ask friends of mine that aren't in the technology field, hey, what does Harold do? Well, he's a trainer, right? He educates, he teaches people things. That's about as close as they're going to get to what I do.
Right on.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Exchange, and of course you're here today to talk about Exchange because you're an Exchange messaging specialist, right?
To a degree, yes.
Right. Now, you're also an Exchange expert, right?
Well, I use that term carefully. Right? The Exchange experts, I consider the folks that really work hands-on with the product. So I go to the product group folks, people like Scott Schnoll, right? He's an expert, right? I look at Ross Smith. He's an expert, right? So there are folks that I call experts. I'm very knowledgeable when it comes to Exchange.
Right on. Yeah. So we do want to talk a little bit about Exchange today because, of course, a lot of folks are either in the process or they're getting ready to embark on the process of upgrading or deploying Exchange 2010.
Okay.
Now, if you've got an existing Exchange organization, how you get ready for Exchange 2010 is going to be different depending on whether your organization is currently at a 2003 or 2007 level, right?
For the most part, that is correct, although there's a lot of commonality,
okay.
Right? Because there's going to be some minimum requirements from an Active Directory perspective. So regardless of whether you're on 03 or 07 from an Exchange perspective, you still have to have a certain level of Active Directory domain controllers. They have to be at a certain level of Windows, right? 2003 SP2. When you look at Exchange, whether you're on 2003 or 2007, you still have to be on the appropriate Service Pack 2 level for each of those. Right? So there are certain things that are common across the board, but in most organizations that are running 2003, they're also probably running Outlook 2003. They're probably using public folders, and so there's this whole thing around public folders and prepping that organization versus things in a 2007 where you've moved to Outlook 2007, maybe moved away from your reliance on public folders already and doing things outside of that arena, then the transition from 07 to 2010 is a little easier. The architecture is very similar, but coming from 03 to 07, you're going 32-bit to 64-bit, public folder reliance to no public folder reliance, and so forth.
Now, so there's two things there, really. There's the question of public folders, and then there's the 64-bit question.
Yep.
And let's start with the 64-bit question, because for anybody coming out of Server 2003 environments, they may not yet have made that transition to 64-bit. And as we know, Exchange since 2007 has been 64-bit only. So when I think about the hardware concerns, the hardware considerations for everybody that's coming out of the 2003 world, what do we have to think about?
So when you look at hardware, and think about this, right? People who are running Exchange 2003 on top of Windows 2003, if they have not made any hardware investments since they deployed it, say in 03 or 04, you're talking about 7-year-old hardware anyways. can that hardware really accommodate what Exchange 2010 is going to do? Probably not. So it's going to be time to refresh hardware. And if you go look on the market today, I challenge you to find a server that does not have a 64-bit capable processor.
Yep.
Right? And on top of that, when you look at a 32-bit environment running 4 gigs of RAM on a server, does it really have access to 4 gigs of RAM? Not really. I don't care what you do with PAE and all those other little fancy switches, you're still limiting yourself to how much memory you have. If you go to a 64-bit architecture and you get access to, 32 gig, 48 gig, you keep going, right? And Exchange 2010 will absolutely love you for that.
And that's, and I mean, the reality is, right, any hardware that anybody bought in the last 5 years, right, you can flip that bit and be 64-bit.
Probably,
pretty
yes.
much,
Yeah.
right? And clearly the benefits of doing that, you know, getting that Exchange database up in memory and not having to write to the disk, right, that's
Correct.
real scalability. So the 64-bit imperative, that need to make that move, right, that's here, that's present.
That's here, that's present. And even then, when you look at Server 2008 R2, if that's what you're going to go with, since you're going to upgrade your infrastructure anyways, this is a 64-bit only OS.
Yeah, that's an excellent
So it's not
point.
like even if you wanted to run the latest version of Windows, you're still going to have to go 64-bit. So irrelevant there.
And Microsoft has made that part of the server operating system roadmap, right? Everything moving forward
Correct.
will be 64-bit only.
Correct.
Okay. So now let's just touch on public folders for
Okay.
just a second, right? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there has been a lot of guidance over the years from Microsoft that public folders are being deprecated, we're getting rid of them, they're going away. And yet, in Exchange 2007 Service Pack 2, we integrated a public folder management GUI into the Exchange Management Console, and we see public folder management extensibility in Exchange 2010. What the heck is going on?
So when you step back and look at all the issues that come about with Exchange, a lot of it kind of came out to public folder issues.
Yeah.
And public folders, when it first came about, was meant for, we'll just say X, Y, and Z. But everybody said, oh, well, we
If we
got
can
it to
do
do
that.
this.
Yeah.
So next thing you know, public folders are being used for things not what it was designed for.
Right.
And there were some issues. Right? I don't know what the official stance is on that, but either way, I will say there have been enough issues, and it doesn't really do everything that people want it to do because it's a public folder architecture. It wasn't meant to be a full classroom environment, which, you know, some people have said, I want that to be my classroom interaction. It's public folder. It's not what it's meant for. So we did say, okay, we're going to do away with it. Right? Starting in 2007, the initial intent was to get rid of public folders altogether.
But
it didn't happen, right? There was a huge outcry. So a lot of customers said, we still need it. We understand that you want to get rid of it, but don't do it just yet. So the Exchange team listened and said, all right, we're not going to do away with it, but we are going to take away the dependency and the reliance upon it. So now if you don't want public folders, you don't have to have it. Right? Outlook 2007 and Outlook 2010 will be just fine if there's no public folders. Offline address book, all of that stuff is still available, but no public folder requirement. Right? If you still want to use it, you can. Yes, it's still there in Exchange 2010, but did we make any improvements? No. Right? It is as it has been since 2003. Unless there's a security issue or whatnot, then we fix those. But outside of that, in terms of just the basic functionality, the replication model, it's still, for all intents and purposes, what was available in Exchange 2003. So it is 11-year-old technology.
But the reality is that, I mean, what you're saying is that public folder, the extension on the public folder lifespan is a good example of Microsoft taking customer feedback and building that into the products.
Correct.
Great. So, all right, man, Exchange 2010. What is new and improved? What are we looking forward to? What's exciting to you?
Oh boy, there's so many things with Exchange 2010, right? If I look at the end user experience as an example, start there. Outlook Web Access, especially with SP1 and some of the new enhancements there, the look and feel is just awesome for a lot of customers who were non-Windows based, right? So maybe they have an engineering team that runs Linux, or there's a marketing or graphics team that's running Macintoshes or Apples. Well, in the past, we didn't really have a good solution for those folks. They had a light version. It was a crappy view. It looked more like Exchange 2000 maybe. Well, in 2010, because of what we did underlying and rewriting the OWA infrastructure, we now have more of a Silverlight type interface, and it really does not matter whether you're running IE, whether you're running Firefox, Safari, or even Google Chrome. All right, I've tested all of those, and I get the same rich premium experience. I get the same view whether I'm running that on a Windows box or a Linux box or a Macintosh box. Doesn't matter.
Including public folder access?
Including public folder access.
Woo!
Yeah. So that experience and the reach kind of client, right, where I have the ability to use Exchange as my back-end server regardless of what I'm running from a client OS. Now, Microsoft as a company would prefer people to run Windows, and so would I, but we understand there's a lot of people out there that really want to use Exchange, but the desktop OS of choice may be slightly different depending on what those end users are doing. Mm-hmm. So that's a big, big piece of it right there.
Now, one of the things that I know has changed in Exchange 2010, our old storage group model goes away.
Correct.
And that's replaced by database availability groups. Can you talk a little bit about DAG and what the implications of that are, really?
Absolutely. So DAGs, we still have storage groups, right? So the concept still exists. It's just that now we have one database, one storage group. And the whole idea of DAGs is so that you can have availability at a lower cost. So if you look at 2007, we came out with some technology called LCR, CCR, and SCR, which allowed you to have some level of redundancy and high availability.
Without making investments in other servers.
Correct. Well, you still had to have other servers, but if you look at CCR, which was the active-passive, you had two nodes, one active, one passive. That's it. No ifs, no ands, no buts, period. You wanted high availability. Our solution was CCR, and you had two nodes. One active. If it failed, then the 40 databases or the 5 databases on that node would all fail over to the passive node. Well, there was a few issues with that. Customers said, well, I want a 4-node CCR cluster. Didn't support it. Well, what if just the storage that database 2 resided on failed and database 2 failed, but the other 8 databases are still fine? Well, in CCR technology, you have to fail all the databases over. So now you have downtime for a certain amount of time for all your users on that server.
Rather than just those in the affected database.
There you go. So when we move to DAGs, the whole idea is, well, let's try to make it as simple as possible. So we kind of did away with SCR, CCR, and LCR. We're still using the underlying technology, but with database availability groups, I can have 16 nodes in a cluster. And now we look at failure from a database level. So if database 1 on server 2 failed because the drive it was sitting on failed, just that one database would fail over to one of the other nodes that we had a copy on. So if we can have up to 16 nodes in a cluster, I can have 3 copies of every database, right, spread across these nodes. And the nice thing is, I can even now start saying, well, do I really need that high-end SAN environment? Right? Maybe I go with lower cost direct attached storage. Because the availability of having 4 copies or 3 copies of a database, why do I need that high-end, RAID subsystem and whatnot? So I can save money there, go with lower-end storage, and know that I've got 4 copies of the database or 3 copies. This whole server goes down. I've got a copy of that database on at least 2 or 3 other servers. Life is good. Now I can stretch that across multiple sites and have a true DR solution at a much lower cost.
Now that kind of flexibility in terms of managing the back-end database infrastructure and providing for that failover and fault tolerance, that integrates with a client access component, the RPC MAPI service on the client access service.
Well, so in order to implement DAGs, right?
Go ahead.
So in the past, what you're referring to or alluding to is the fact that Outlook clients that connect MAPI to the mailbox, traditionally, they would go directly to the mailbox server. So if we're on the corporate network, the Exchange server's in our data center, I come into the office, I boot up Outlook, it's going to go directly to the mailbox store, right? And that was the same on 2007.
Yep.
In 2010, we extracted all of those communications, and everything now goes through the CAS role. including MAPI clients. So there is a MAPI service, RPC service, that sits on the CAS server that Outlook clients in MAPI mode will connect to. And that way, if my database is being transitioned because it's down, the client actually is connected to the CAS server, and it doesn't matter where the database really sits. It can be moved, it can be transitioned. My mailbox could literally be moved from one database on server 1 to a different database on server 2, and I could be up and running at 10 o'clock in the morning. Nobody would, I wouldn't know. I just keep working. I'm sending emails, receiving emails, and at that last possible second when the switch is made, that's when I'll probably know, right, that my database or that my mailbox has been moved. But all along, I've been working just fine.
And that's the much touted online mailbox move, right?
Correct.
And what are the requirements for that Exchange 2010, and what does the client have to be?
So Outlook 2010.
Outlook 2010.
Correct. Or actually, even Outlook 2007 would support it, but you would still have to do a restart of Outlook.
Okay.
And technically, Exchange 2007 Service Pack 2, if my mailbox was sitting on that server and I moved it to a 2010 server, so long as I was running Outlook 2007 or greater, I could have my mailbox being moved online.
Awesome.
Right. 2003, sorry, the mailbox is unavailable until the move completes.
Oh, and hey, we didn't even mention, but I mean, in terms of legacy Exchange systems, if I want to make this move to 2010, I can't even have any Exchange 2000 servers in my org,
Correct.
right?
Correct. I have to get rid of all my Exchange 2000 or older servers and go into what's called native mode, right, or Exchange 2003 native mode.
Yep. Okay. So, all right, now, I know you were one of the TechNet presenters principally responsible for driving the launch, right, the unified
the Exchange
messaging.
launch stuff,
Right.
correct?
So tell me what's exciting in unified messaging in Exchange 2010.
In 2007, we had right, the voicemail capability. In 2010, we took it to another level. One, we now also, and yeah, there's other companies doing the same thing now, but we take a voicemail and transcribe it to text. So in my inbox, I'll see a text transcription, so I can at least see what that voicemail is about without having to listen to it first, right? Especially if you're in a crowded room or you're somewhere public. It's not 100%, but 70 to 80% accurate, enough so I know whether I need to listen to it now or if it can wait, right? Also, if you call me and it goes into voicemail, historically it's one outgoing, hello, you reached Wong, not here, leave me a message. But what if there are some key customers, family members, friends, people that I want to be able to give the option to reach me even if I don't pick up the phone, right? So now there's a new capability in the role in 2010 where I can create these customized answer rules where when it recognizes that a call comes from you, Michael, I can actually present you with a custom menu that says, to reach Harold on his cell, press 1. To reach Harold at home, press 2. To reach Harold on the golf course, press 3. Right? Whatever that menu is that I select, and now I don't even have to give out my numbers, right? But you can still reach me. You can just press 1, and Exchange will dial me on my cell phone. I'll answer. It's not a blind connect. I'll answer, and it'll say call from Michael, and I get to choose whether I want to take it or not. Right? So that's a new capability. So I can customize that for different customers. So maybe for one group of users, I want to let them be able to reach me at home by pressing 2. Another group, I don't want them to be able to do that, but they can press 1 and they can reach me on my cell phone.
So these are called answer rules?
Yep, they're call answering rules.
And these are defined, or these are based on a caller ID?
So it does require that caller ID is passed and that it recognizes based on a number. So I can put in specific phone numbers that I'm looking for or contact cards.
But that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about how, for the average salesman, right, 80% of his business comes from those 20% of customers.
Yep.
And he wants to know when they need him.
Exactly. So if I'm in sales, which I'm glad I'm not, but I could always say, hey, I've got 2 big deals on the table that are multi-million-dollar deals, and I want these 4 customers at each, or 4 people at each of those customers to always be able to reach me right now anyways while I'm trying to close this deal. So I can set up those call answering rules so that no matter what I'm doing, I know that they can always press a number without me giving up personal, private phone numbers, that they can still somehow get a hold of me.
Boy, I'll tell you, Harold, when I think about, as the Exchange administrator, right, so often IT is looked at as a cost center, not a driver of business.
Correct.
But when I think about these kinds of functions, I mean, these are business drivers. To be able to empower my sales force with that kind of tool, I mean, that has unlimited potential to the business.
I have to agree, right? There's a lot of those business drivers, but it's not just I bring up a new feature. These are features that really can add value to the way people are working, take away time wasted doing other things.
Think about, and on that subject, right? You were talking about OWA improvements earlier.
Correct.
But we didn't talk about SharePoint access through OWA. Do we have?
No. So in 2007, when I logged into OWA, there was a little option where I can gain access to file shares or SharePoint sites.
Yeah.
We've done away with that.
Oh, that's taken out now.
That's taken out.
Okay, we can cut that.
But there was a lot of implications around that, and there were security concerns.
Okay.
Right? And even though you could do it securely, there were still security concerns. The perception that it was insecure, and if you look at the base of customers that actually utilized it, it was so minuscule that it didn't make sense to continue that feature set.
Was there, were there login cookies on those remote boxes?
No, there were not login cookies, but the fact that I was logged into OWA, and if I walked away and I didn't lock my machine, and somebody walked up to it in a public environment, they could then click that link and now access stuff.
And now they're
right?
on
Other
your
than just
internal
email.
network.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of concerns around that.
Okay, that's fair. So when we think, so we got a lot of folks out there that are getting ready for these deployments. What has Microsoft done in Exchange 2010 to ease this process of actually rolling out Exchange 2010?
Oh, so we've done a lot of guidance, right? We've got a lot of tools, like the Best Practice Analyzer tool does a great job of analyzing what your existing environment is, making recommendations as you prep to go to 2010. There are deployment assistants that'll give you great, list checklists that you can follow. There's also remote connectivity analyzer, so that once let's say you've started down the path, you've implemented some 2010 servers, and you want to know, is connectivity working? But you don't want to take the time to try to set up a machine, go out on the internet, connect it somehow, and then come back in. Well, there's a service which is run by us. You go to this website and you plug in your internal environment, like you want to test OWA connectivity. Well, you plug in your OWA URL, you plug in a username and password, and we'll go test it for you. Right?
Really?
We'll check to make sure that it works. Exchange ActiveSync will check to make sure that it's working. And we run through everything that a valid client would do and give you feedback as to what's failing, what's not failing, what's working, what's not working, things like that.
So do you recommend I set up a test user account for that, test
yes,
mailbox
you
for that?
should always set up a test user account for that. Don't use your production.
Right.
Right, because otherwise, just from a security perspective, I would never do that.
Right.
We've also improved the wizard so that if you're coming from a 2003 environment, Exchange 2003, when you start the process going, it'll recognize that, hey, I see 2003 here, and it'll present you then with additional prompts to integrate 2010 with 2003.
Okay.
Right? Because if you aren't coming from a 2003 environment, then you may not need to do things with public folders and so forth. So it recognizes that.
Just thinking, do you want to talk at all about, just while we're on the subject of coming out of the 2003 environment, and for those who are coming out of the Exchange 2003 environment, there's going to be that requirement to support legacy host names through transition. Do we want to talk about that at all, or just touch on it as a...
So from a legacy host name perspective, you're talking on the server, depending on what you came up with server names, right? We've actually done a lot of work so that we can still continue that communication, so that's not going to be an issue. Mm-hmm. The challenge is if you have domain names that were what we call single, I forget the name of that term.
Single label? Single
label domain names. Initially, we didn't support it, but we do now support that. Hopefully people move away from that because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of issues in terms of connectivity with multiple domains in a forest, but that's not necessarily legacy. It's a matter of trust. So you might have multiple organizations where you have a forest level trust between them. Mm-hmm. Depending on how you set up your forest and where the trust level exists, you may have some communication issues if you don't have the right trust level set up. Okay. Things like that. Right on. But not necessarily legacy host names, though. So you're building all new servers, by the way.
Oh, there is that. Yeah.
You're doing a transition. You don't do an in-place upgrade. You build a new server, so you're going to give it a new name, right? And then you're going to move stuff off of your old stuff to the new stuff, and then decommission the old stuff.
And that's an excellent point. When you look at the Microsoft documentation, everything these days talks about transition, transition to 2010, because there's no upgrade path.
Not an in-place upgrade
Not an
path.
in-place upgrade path.
Correct.
Okay. Well, Harold, I'll tell you, we have covered just about everything that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else that you think is really critical for people to know, or things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, so one thing when you look at a transition or moving, upgrade, whatever you want to call it, if you're coming from 03 or 07, doesn't matter. What you really, really want to look at is not just Exchange, right? But actually take a look at all the other components that connect into Exchange. What am I talking about? Backup. What are you using to back up Exchange today? What about your BES servers? What about your fax servers, right? All of these third-party components that interact with Exchange.
PBX, if you're looking at UM.
Yeah, whatever that is. If today you're running an old version of BES, you need to make sure that you understand what version of BES will work with Exchange 2010.
And what's BES? I don't know what BES is.
BlackBerry Enterprise Server. So if you're doing BlackBerry stuff, and a lot of customers are, what are the prereqs from their end? If you're running a fax server that integrates directly with Exchange, what are the requirements? Do they have a version, a gateway version that runs with Exchange 2010? Or do you have to leave that one there with your Exchange 2003 or with your Exchange 2007 in place, right? What are the requirements? So don't look at just Exchange, because that's where I see a lot of people, they go, okay, my Exchange environment is okay, so I'm ready to move. They start the move, and then they find out, oh, I was running BES 3.2. Well, I need to be on 4.6 or 5.0, and I'm not there yet. Or I'm using a old version of backup software that supported Exchange 2003. You make the move to 2010, and that backup program no longer backs up Exchange 2010. Then what do you do until you get the new version? Are you running for a week without any backups? So you really got to look at the entire environment and everything that interacts with Exchange, and make sure you have the version that will work with Exchange 2010.
And that's an excellent point, right? And it really goes to the heart of Exchange's integration with multiple applications that all support business functions.
Correct.
Critical infrastructure choices.
And then the last thing on DAGs, if you're looking to do DAGs at all in the future, and you want to minimize the amount of work that's going to be required to implement it at a future date, make sure the Windows OS you're running is the Enterprise Edition.
Enterprise Edition.
Because we're using clustering services that's only available in Windows Server Enterprise.
Yep.
The Exchange Edition could be standard, right? So long as you only have 5 databases, then you're okay. And then after that, if you need more than 5, you'll need Exchange Enterprise.
Excellent. Well, Harold, I thank you so much for coming out today.
No problem.
It's always
Glad
a pleasure
to be here.
to talk to you. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today.